Reasons for the Great Revolt of 1857. This video is brought to you by Unacademy in association with YarnCentral.com. In our previous videos, we have looked at the policies of the East India Company and the effect they've had on different people. Different people including kings, queens, peasants, landlords, tribals, soldiers were all affected in different ways. Now, in general, all people resist policies and actions that harm their interests or go against their sentiments. The Great Revolt of 1857 was an outcome of such a resistance shared by a lot of people. So let us recall the certain incidents which we have more or less mentioned earlier, which could have contributed to this revolt. Now, since the mid 18th century, the Nawabs and the Rajas had all seen that their power eroded. Their authority and honor was in a crisis situation. We have already seen how residents had been stationed in many courts. The freedom of the rulers reduced, their armed forces disbanded, and their revenues and territories were taken away by stages. Now, many ruling families tried to negotiate with the British to protect their interests. For example, Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi wanted the company to recognize her adopted son as the heir to the kingdom after the death of her husband. Similarly, Nana Saheb, the adopted son of Peshwa Bajirao II, pleaded that he be given his father's pension when the latter died. However, the company felt too confident of its superiority and military powers, so it turned down these pleas. We've discussed this before, but in 1801, a subsidiary alliance was imposed on the state of Awadh, and in 1856, Awadh was annexed over. To top it all, the Governor General, Lord Dalhousie, declared that the territory was being misgoverned and the British rule was needed to ensure proper administration. This really affected the people of Awadh. The company's next plan was to bring the Mughal dynasty to an end. The name of the Mughal king was removed from the coins minted by the company. In 1849, Governor General Dalhousie announced that after the death of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the family of the king would be shifted out of the Red Fort and given another place in Delhi to reside in. In 1856, Governor General Canning decided that Bahadur Shah Zafar would be the last Mughal king, and after his death, none of his descendants would be recognized as kings. They would be just called princes. When the Europeans had just entered India, take a look at how powerful the Mughal Empire was in the early 16th century. Now take a look at this map, which represents India in the year 1857. Most of India was already taken over by the British. As you can see, Bengal, Oudh, most of northwestern India was already under British rule. Nagpur, most of southern India was also under the British rule. And the rest of the kingdoms were somehow indirectly also controlled by the British. So almost all of India was taken over by the British. Mughal Empire was nowhere to be seen. Recall what we have seen in the past, in the countryside. Well, in the countryside, the peasants and the zamindars resented the high taxes and the rigid methods of the revenue collection. Many even failed to pay back their loans to the money lenders and gradually lost the lands they had tilled for generations. Now, the Indian sepoys in the employment of the company also had reasons for discontent. They were unhappy about their pay, allowances, and condition of service. Many of them also felt that the new rules made by the British violated their religious sensibilities and beliefs. By the way, did you know that in those days, many people in the country believed that if they crossed the sea, they would lose their religion and caste. So when in 1824, the sepoys were told to go to Burma by sea, they rejected it. although they all agreed to go by the land route. Now, they were severely punished for such an act, and since the issue did not die down, in 1856 the company passed a new law which stated that every person who took the employment in the company's army had to agree to serve overseas if required. As if this was not enough, the sepoys also reacted to what was happening in the countryside, as they had many relatives in the countryside. Many of them had peasants, families living in the villages. So the anger of the peasants quickly spread amongst the sepoys. Now the British believed that the Indian society had to be reformed. So they passed laws to stop the practice of sati and encourage the remarriage of widows. English language education was also actively promoted. After 1830, the company allowed Christian missionaries to function freely in its domain and even own land and property. Within 20 years, in 1850, a new law was passed to make conversion to Christianity even easier. Now, this law allowed an Indian who had converted to Christianity to inherit the property of his ancestors. So, because of all these reasons, many Indians believed that the British were destroying their religion, their social customs, and their traditional way of life. So, these reasons and all of the previously mentioned reasons were enough for the Indian people to rise up in mutiny against the British. This mutiny was again converted into a very popular rebellion known as the Great Revolt of 1857. We'll be discussing that in our next video.